You talk about motivating the base. What the center left, what the Democrats had for a long time was unions, which was an automatic driver of a lot of people. But we have been deunionized. And the problem that Democrats have is that Joe Manchin, Mark Kelly, Kristen Sinema, and occasionally mention Mark Warner, but he has always been a big problem. What helps Democrats broadly does not necessarily help them. There's not we've seen this in the context of right-wing media, right? Like Tucker Carlson says something and Dave Rubin is saying some version of it and Glenn Beck is saying some version of it and, Ben Shapiro is saying some version of it. Like they're all on whatever it is that day. And they're just on it. And I don't know if they get there all the same talking points or they just mimic other people. Like there is a unified voice. An election in any given Republican congressional district is so much closer to the national narrative of the Republican Party than it is in the context of the Democratic Party. And that is their advantage because everybody's on the same page. So I give you Mark Warner explaining why he doesn't think the PRO Act, which forget about issues of justice and providing for workers, okay? For the sake of this argument, I think obviously this is the most important part about it.
Well,
but
and just trying to appeal to what they are interested in.
Appealing to what we would perceive as his self-interest, right? Which is to be a part of the majority party. His self-interest is not necessarily to be a part of his primary self-interest is him. And then that is secondary. And there is space in between those in a way that there isn't for a Ted Cruz or for a Republican, the vast majority of Republicans. Here is Mark Warner.
The PRO Act is a combination of a dozen plus pieces of legislation, the vast majority of which I support. I support the right of workers to organize. I believe that the balance between workers and management tilts way too much to management right now, and that was exacerbated under 4 years of Donald Trump, where the National Labor Relations Board was totally, I think, biased against worker rights. So there's a lot to like in the PRO Act, and but what I want to get to is, how can we make some of the areas where I'd like to see some corrections, so that this very expansive piece of legislation could be supported on the floor. And one area that I know I've sent you.
Pause it just for 1 second, because he says some corrections there. I just want to make this point because Ryan pointed this out. Ryan Grimm on Twitter pointed out how Mark Warner's pet project has been these portable benefits for a while, which essentially allows for independent contractors, gig workers, to have some sort of grant provided by the federal government as a pilot program so they can have some retirement benefits as they're working as gig workers, because he's not interested in forcing the companies to provide those or allowing independent contractors to unionize and demand it. He wants to be the gatekeeper and create these portable benefits. By the way, Medicare for All would be the ultimate portable benefit, meaning you could go from job to job to job to still have it. He's not interested in that either, but he's been since like 2016, 2017 talking about these portable benefits. So there is some wiggle room for him if he wants to have it, but he's not going to. Make no mistake, based on his obsession with this, his little pet project, this portable benefit thing, he is not going to support the ability for independent contractors to unionize. I mean, that's what he's signaling there, in my view. And let's also be clear in the construction in which he's presenting all this. I agree with the vast majority of which I support. Well, then, you know what, dude? Suck it up. Suck up the tiny portion of which you think just needs a slight corrective, right? But the idea that you're out there in this instance talking about what you don't like. But let's listen.
And one area that I know I've sent you, Megan, all my background. This is an area that I've been focused on literally for the last 6 years, and that's the changing nature of work. We had an economy in the 20th century where people would go to work, oftentimes for a long time. My dad worked for the same company for 36 years, never made a lot of money, but with that work came a whole series of benefits: healthcare, retirement, unemployment, disability. That notion of long-term permanent work with a single firm is fundamentally changing.
Why?
I think about my kids who are in their 20s and early 30s. They're all going to have a variety of jobs. Many of them want a variety of jobs and variety of gigs. They want the flexibility of whether it's driving Uber part-time, running out their apartment Airbnb, being a part-time IT consultant, maybe working in a restaurant as well, having a series of revenue sources.
You know what? Can I
all
just pause once? Because I'm a person from this generation. You know what I'd like? And I think most of the people from my generation would like one of those that does all of the above as far as your well-being materially.
Oh, come on, Matt. Don't you want to be my age and be going like, hey, you know what? I think next week I'm going to wait table.
I'd like to do all sorts of different things, but I don't want to have to do them. Like, I'd like to learn a little bit of IT maybe, but to have to do it to pay my rent, I don't think so.
Yeah, he's phrasing it as if this is just like a quirky piece of personality for this new renegade generation. Yeah, they love renting out their apartments to Airbnb and then having to drive Uber after they finish their 9 to 5. It's just like, they're just artists, man.
This is the tension, like with Democrats, and why I'm surprised to see so much support behind the PRO Act, because there's PRO Act Democrats and there's gig economy / Prop 22 Democrats, and like, there needs to be a fight publicly between those two, because I think we could win that. Because this is very concerning about the way that they'll mention like the labor force of years gone by. It reminds me of the Harvard Clean Slate Project David and I talked about with Marshall Steinbaum, where they talk about how, it was racist because it left people out of these full, worker protections. And it concluded that we just won't give anybody those full worker protections. We'll just transition away to this new gig economy thing. And it's very insidious, and there needs to be a line drawn against this sort of thing, I think.
It's egalitarian if no one gets anything.
Right.
Right.
Well, that was the old line about like, why are our government workers getting a pension? Well, other people out there aren't getting a pension. Well, wait a second. They used to get a pension. Why don't we up their pensions? Well, it's just easier to take away government pensions and everybody's on the same situation. But let's continue.
Being a part-time IT consultant, maybe working in a restaurant as well, having a series of revenue sources all at the same time. What I have promoted is what I think is a fairly dramatic change in our social safety net that says no matter what kind of work you do, starting with that first hour of work, there ought to be benefits attached. And my fear is that parts of the PRO Act tries to fit all work into kind of a 20th century classic W-2 employment status. I think there ought to be a way where we can provide benefits, provide flexibility. I still think there is a role for labor organizations to help manage these benefits, particularly for somebody who's got a variety of revenue sources coming in that meets workers where they're at in 2021, doesn't think we're going to return to a 1980s kind of economy. And the interesting thing, even within the labor movement, there are organizations.
1 second to that. We talked about this with Marshall as well, Marshall Steinbaum, economics professor at University of Utah, I think, that there might be some unions that are open to this idea that they'll be the representative body for these workers with this sort of carve out, not full, worker protections, but smaller ones. And that was a problem too. So that's another reason for the PRO Act. Like, you need to get the PRO Act on board to protect against like the Prop 22 hell, basically.
Yeah. Prop 22, just a reminder, was passed in California to essentially create a third cohort of workers. And that is folks who are not wage earners, which means that you do not get the same With the W-2, you don't get the same labor protections. You don't get automatic, building of your Social Security and Medicare funds. But that you can function as those people, but also not get those benefits. That's the new cohort between the 1099 contractors and the actual people who are considered workers and get all sorts of protections. I mean, this is, it's bad.
And just fun fact though, quickly, because Matt was talking about the chasm, or not the chasm, but just I guess the split between pro-act Democrats and then also the Democrats who are the Prop 22 Democrats. Kamala Harris's brother-in-law was the top lawyer who negotiated Prop 22, I believe, in California as a lawyer for Uber, was being considered for a spot in the administration. I don't think he didn't end up getting it, but like that the fight in the Biden administration is also indicative of that same dynamic Matt discussed.
Yeah, well, let's remember. I mean, I've told the story many times before. In 2016, you go to the Democratic convention in Philadelphia. If you took a cab, they dropped you at the end of like a mile-long parking lot. If you took an Uber, you got dropped off at the door. I mean, it was...
I really should try to find if there's documentary video of that, because I remember that at the time just being the most... what are you doing, dumb?
Well, hey, it's because, what's his face? All the Obama people were, went into Uber and this and that whole gig world. All right, continue.
Like the Freelancers Union, like the National Domestic Workers Alliance that I've been working with very closely, that believe that this portable benefit approach ought to be part of the new social contract. And I look forward to working with them and members of traditional organized labor to get to a spot that will allow me to support all the other good things that are in the PRO Act, but also has a forward-leaning view in terms of what work looks like in the 21st century. I do not think we're going to go back to the world where everyone works, in a classic 40-hour-a-week, full-time job, long-term employment. I just think that the nature of the world, the nature of technology, the nature of globalization has changed things, and we need to have a social contract and a set of benefits that meets workers where they are today.
Democrats like him don't speak with any agency. The nature of globalization has changed things.
Yeah, it's all on rails.
Yeah, it's all independent of your actions in this area. Like, this is the direct result of his kind of politics, and he's acting like it happened organically.
It's even more than that, because he's saying we've got to meet the workers where they are, as if this decision by the workers is like, man, I love the fact that I need so much that I now have look, if I'm 18 or I'm 22, it's like, okay, I love the flexibility. If I just need enough cash, back when I was 22, I was living in a place where the bathroom was down the hall, and I was just like, the best thing about my job is I get free Chinese food, 3 meals a day, 6 days a week, and I don't make that much cash, but I don't need it. Well, at one point you get a little bit older, you say, I think I'd like a bathroom in the apartment that I'm in, or something like that. And this flexibility, as if it's like, we're meeting workers where they are. No, it's first what we do is we shove workers to where they got to go. And then we got to say, whoa, we got to meet them where they are because they have been so dispossessed.
There's a better way to speak to like the neoliberal just destruction of the workplace, to where we look at the office and get nostalgic. And it's that we should be expanding these programs, like Emma said, Medicare for all, give people dental, give people all these benefits that aren't tied to labor, aren't tied to them actually selling their work to capitalists. Like, just give it to them. And then, they'll be super free. They'll be able to do gigs like crazy. I'll be doing all sorts of gigs if you cover my health care and my rent isn't like insanely priced. I'll be gigging all over the place.
How is this not the exact same talking points made in the 80s for like the 401k and W-2 employment in the age of unions? It's this same playbook, but just a lower standard over time.
And it's exactly the same playbook. And then I also like how he frames it like, look, the vast majority of which I support. However, the fact is, he's saying this stuff is what is determinant of my support.
Yeah.
Not the vast majority of which I support, this stuff. So it's like, I got, a bucket full of stuff over here and a tiny cup over here, except for that bucket's full of feathers and this cup is full of lead. And this is the one that I'm going to. And Manchin is supportive of the PRO Act now, right? He is the biggest obstacle, as is Sinema. Maybe you can throw his he is not going to support this bill if it allows for independent contractors to unionize, and that is demonic. It's just demonic. But that's the reality of what Mark Warner's. I mean, he will hold water for the industries that finance him, and that's going to be that.
I also love the fact that he's bringing his children into it as the richest senator, saying that they might drive Ubers.
Oh my God,
Give me a break.
Well,
the thing is that like they can really follow their dreams. I mean, listen, I've talked to people who are like, I'd love to drive. I just love to drive. And the idea that I can get paid for it is great. And you know what? And the fact that I'm never going to have to worry about it having to pay for my house or my health care or my kids' college education or any of that is great. I can just drive all the time because Dad's a millionaire. And so I am too now. And so I
will bet every dollar in my bank account. Every dollar in my bank account, I will bet this pinky that I chopped last night. I will bet that none of Mark Warner's kids do anything in Uber. Drive 1 hour of their life for Uber or Lyft or any rideshare service.
This gig economy thing reminds me of something I read about the farm community in the 80s. There was problems going on with profitability, so there was these sort of like mail order things where they would send you an engine to work on in the winter months when you had less to do. And it was, like you have this empty garage, you can use it in the winter months, go make some money. And it turned into like just a crunch where you have these farmers that are stuck between trying to fix these engines and all the other things that actually need to be done on a farm all the time. It turns out there was an overestimation on how much spare time they had, and they were just squeezed and just doing, being exploited for their labor.
We've been saying the name Mark Warner around here, and he's going to be a problem with this. We'll see. The next 100 days are going to be telling. And it is, the dilemma is this, is like Mark Warner. The fundamental dilemma that we have is just that like the leverage is just different. The leverage is different. Because if you are Joe Manchin or you're Mark Warner, like Mark Warner does not have to go home and account for the fact that the PRO Act doesn't pass. Virginia is just still not that state, or at least he doesn't believe he's going to. If the PRO Act doesn't pass, he's not going to have to account for it. And, just even in the most cynical, maybe he doesn't care, maybe he does, I don't know, but he's not going to have to account for it. It is much easier to stop legislation than it is to push legislation. It is much easier if the downside of a piece of legislation not passing is not very large, for you to stand in the way of it versus those who want aspects of this legislation to pass. Am I making sense here? If you have an act that brings relief to people, like $1,500 checks, you could stand in the way of it because you're not getting $2,000. But the bottom line is if your opponents don't care really that much, they don't feel like they're going to pay a price for those $1,500 checks not showing up, you're at a disadvantage. Your leverage may look the same. Your vote can prohibit that from passing, but the cost of any part of that bill not passing is just greater to you, both maybe politically and morally. And that's the difference. Like the hostage taker probably doesn't care if he shoots hostages if it gets him out the door and onto the helicopter. But you, who is trying to keep the hostages alive, maybe it's just worth it to give him the helicopter. I mean, you just don't know, right?
Well, this was why people criticized Pelosi for the second chance at relief back when Trump was still in office.
Yeah, I exactly. Because like, you don't know if it's not going to come. And that's why I found it very problematic, because I think that she was, and we said this at the time, she was afraid that Trump would get the credit for it.
Yes.
And that it would sink what ended up not materializing congressional win. or a big congressional win.